Stephen Twigg.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to serve, to follow my fellow member of the International Development Committee. Can I welcome today's debate, thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting it, congratulate the honourable gentleman from Arundel and South Downs, and in particular thank the range of non-governmental organisations, both UK-based and based in other countries, and global ones like Amnesty International, for their assistance. Next year marks the 30th anniversary of Section 28. Just 3 decades ago, this Parliament, this Chamber, carried discriminatory legislation. And I think we can learn something from the past 30 years, because after Section 28 was passed, you saw a renewal of LGBT organisations in this country, the formation of the Stonewall Group, lesbian and gay organisation in our trade union movement, and lesbian and gay campaigns within political parties. And the Labour Campaign for Lesbian and Gay Rights, now known as LGBT Labour, played a critical role in what went on to be Labour's '97 manifesto. And there are lessons from that experience here in the UK, I believe, for this debate today. Because what happened here was that this place listened to LGBT communities themselves. And that, I believe, needs to be our starting point when looking at global LGBT rights. In the briefing that the honourable gentleman arranged earlier, somebody said change has to come from below. And in a world where there are still 13 countries where being gay is punishable by death, 75 countries where same-sex contact remains a criminal offence, the challenges are enormous. Can I welcome the Department for International Development's policy paper on LGBT rights published last year? In particular, the focus in the paper, firstly, on the realisation of human rights underpins sustainable development. And secondly, I think very importantly, that we need to identify and engage with the southern voices that are beginning to emerge on LGBT issues. 2 years ago, the world agreed the Sustainable Development Goals, and their theme is leave no one behind. Inclusion must mean non-discrimination, but also if we're going to achieve the SDGs on health, we need the ability to reach all communities, including LGBT communities. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a very powerful speech. Would he agree with me that it's absolutely crucial when we're looking at the work of DFID that we specifically look at what support is being given to deal with the HIV/AIDS epidemic, particularly when it applies to the LGBT plus community, the MSM community in developing countries, particularly when we're looking at pulling out bilateral or multilateral aid, making sure that adequate services for those communities remain?
Can I thank my honourable friend for that very important point? And it speaks to a broader issue, which is about the availability of relatively small amounts of funding for local organisations that are working on HIV and AIDS or on equality issues on the ground. This is an issue the International Development Committee raises across the full breadth of DFID's work, but I think it has particular resonance and relevance for today's debate, and it may be one that the Minister is able to refer to in his response to the debate. Can I praise the DFID LGBT staff network for the work that they do in this regard as well? Now, I want to address what is a tricky issue in this debate. Some people will say, probably not in the debate today, but some will say, how come we're giving aid to these countries whose governments are then acting so appallingly to their LGBT communities? Should we not be cutting aid? And I want to really urge caution against such an approach. Cutting support for malaria programmes in the poorest countries of Africa does not help LGBT rights. Cutting back support for school programmes in some of the poorest countries of Africa does not help LGBT rights. What we do need to do is to engage with civil society, both here in our own country, but most importantly on the ground in the countries concerned. That sort of engagement, I think, would be very, very fruitful. Can I welcome last year's appointment by the UN of Vitit Munterbehorn as the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity? He has a very important role to play. His position was challenged, and there was a vote last year, 84 votes to 77, to allow him to continue, but 77 countries didn't want him to. And I really want to congratulate our government for the leading role that the UK played in defending his appointment, but also the government of South Africa and several Caribbean countries that stood out against the pressure to try to get rid of this particular position. Can I pay tribute to the role that the trade unions have played, both here and internationally, in the struggle for LGBT rights? LGBT rights are workers' rights. And next week, Public Services International and Education International will host their 4th LGBT forum in Geneva. There are many crucial issues about rights in the workplace, about violence against people at work, but also trade unions in their role more broadly in society in making the case for equality and against discrimination. The honourable gentleman spoke about Chechnya, and I think many of us are deeply concerned about developments in Chechnya in recent months. Last week, Human Rights Watch highlighted the case of Maxim Lapunov, who had been confined for 12 days in a dark basement by the regime. The example of Uganda has already been described by my honourable friend from Bristol. A recent daily newspaper front page in Uganda said, "Exposed, Uganda's top homos named," with photographs of allegedly gay men. Can I pay tribute to the very brave community in Uganda? They have celebrated Pride there since 2012. Tragically, this year they weren't allowed to. Let us think of those sisters and brothers in Uganda. I want to say something today about Tanzania, because there is a catalogue of concerns that have been raised by various organisations, including the International HIV/AIDS Alliance. And the most recent incident was last week when 13 activists and lawyers were arrested in Tanzania simply for trying to challenge the ban on drop-in centres that serve communities at risk of HIV. These 13 were accused of promoting homosexuality. They are still in detention. Can I urge the Minister to take to his colleagues in the Foreign Office the vital importance of the United Kingdom raising the cases of these imprisoned people? The honourable gentleman spoke about Iran. We know that Iran is a country that still executes people simply for the crime of being LGBT. Can I urge the Minister to set out what the government is doing to press those countries like Iran that do that to stop using the death penalty against LGBT people? Most of the examples I've given are understandably from Russia, from Africa and the Middle East, but I want to say something about what's happening in the United States of America. President Trump's decision to ban transgender people from the US military is an enormous shame, and the one that I hope we can condemn on a cross-party basis. I pay tribute to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America for his positive and measured response to President Trump's actions, and I urge our government to do all it can to press President Trump to think again on his attempt to ban trans people from the armed forces. But this is not the only incident of greater homophobia and transphobia in American politics and policy. Recently, the United States voted against a UN Human Rights Council resolution that simply condemned the death penalty being used against people because they are LGBT. President Obama left a very positive legacy on LGBT rights, which tragically President Trump is undoing at the moment. That leaves a vacuum in terms of global LGBT rights. I hope the United Kingdom, working with like-minded countries around the world, will play the leadership role that we should to ensure that we do not slip back. Instead, we move forward to global LGBT equality.